could have been even faster. So they really played this well. The problem started the day after they had gone back.
I want to get the final question in.
Sure. My name is Vanessa Ogla. I teach modern European history and international history here in the department. And among other courses, I teach a class on international relations in which I, of course, talk about the Marshall Plan. And I found your paper sort of most helpful in really pointing out the stark differences between the Morgenthau and the Marshall Plan and the ways the difference was linked to, if you want, the vision for future political control in this place. And this is something that often gets lost, the fact that the Morgenthau Plan so much really reverted to the post-World War I scenario in the implicit assumption that you would not have political presence and control. And that's actually also a question that interests my undergraduate students very well, and so with your permission I will happily sort of integrate what I read here in my course in the spring. However, if I would present to my students what you lay out in your paper in the way you do, I would probably lose their interest after, say, 10 minutes, simply because there are no people in your paper. And I'm saying this essentially because I think sort of the way you write this and present this, and by referring to American post-war planners and essentially sort of leaving out these debates about strategy, security, and all that, what is at stake in this post-war moment, sort of leads you to, of course, if, you know, coming from what you do, leads you to prioritize sort of the economic answer to the question why the shift from Morgenthau to Marshall, if I understand you correctly, because economically it didn't make sense and there were early indicators that it was also not working. But, you know, and of course that has to go at the expense of other explanations, but the way in which you sort of just essentially brush aside the whole kind of security question and the early Cold War on page 9 with one sentence leaves me sort of as someone who is interested in international relations a little dissatisfied. And I also believe you may get sort of the role of the Soviets, or that the Soviets were intended to play in the Marshall Plan situation in the eyes of the Americans, not entirely right here, because I believe that after Marshall made his speech, Kennan actually had advised Marshall to present the option of joining Marshall Plan Aid to the Soviets. And after he makes his speech, Bevin, Bidot invite Molotov to come to Paris. He comes. He brings with him an army of economic advisors, and Bevin and Bidot freak because they fear that the Soviets would actually agree to this proposal. And the whole idea was actually not to worry about Soviet obstruction, but rather to put the blame essentially on the Soviet side for entrenching division and for having to deal with, you know, Eastern Europe on themselves, which in turn would make sort of the task in the Western sphere easier. So I think there's a lot going on in terms of really the confluence of politics, economics, and very much security interests in these years between 1944 and 1947. And it is the moment where you can see sort of crystallizing the ways in which prosperity becomes linked to security. And that really becomes the key to understanding so much of international relations in the 20th century.
You're entirely right. Absolutely. This is a short paper in which I'm basically just doing an expressionist thing with a few, let's say, paintbrushes, and it's really no more than that. I could tell you the wonderful stories about the American ambassador in Paris walking into Bidot's office with a sheet of paper and saying, look, I'm afraid dismantling of the wool industry is really off the agenda in America now, but we have something else for you here, and would you like to adopt this as your official French policy? And it's basically a document that later becomes the Schuman Plan. And the ambassador is writing back to Washington. He said, look, I really felt bad because the guy almost signed. You're of course right. I mean, in the end, history is made by people. I don't have it here because once I put it in here, it becomes a book, and it probably will become a book. It might. It's true. It's true. That is entirely clear. On the Soviets, again, it is so tricky. If you look at what historians have produced from the Soviet documents, the story is a bit different because, or maybe it isn't. Let me tread carefully here. Let me tread carefully here. The Soviets really seem to be undecided about what to do. And there are two schools of thought. We have made this mistake, at least in my generation, probably made too much of the mistake of thinking of the Soviets as a monolithic bloc. Already the policy towards East Germany, that is quite clearly two, if not three different camps. The policy toward America and what exactly to do with the revitalization of German industry. Again, it's two camps. It's the same camps. And those who think that Germany needs to be dismantled are infuriated once they realize late '46 that the Americans are actually developing new ideas. And they find this absolutely terrible. And yes, to some extent, it's the beginnings of containment. Question is, and so I'm simply not an expert on this. I'm very happy to literally pass the buck. The question is, of course, what is cause and what is effect. As an economist, I would say it's probably typical general equilibrium thing. All these things happen at the same time, and it's impossible to disentangle. It's a very complex process. But yes, it's made by people.
I think on the yes, it's made by people point rather than on the economists can't explain anything point. we will end this splendid session. Thank you very much to all. And there's some food and drink, and even protein amongst the food. Thanks to the